If you feel like your chest is never truly clear, like there's always something sitting there, heavy stuck, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to show you is something most people never connect. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. My name is Dr. Vincent Halberg. I've spent over 2 decades studying the link between environmental triggers and chronic respiratory dysfunction. The kind of dysfunction that doesn't show up on routine checkups, that gets dismissed as just allergies or a little congestion. The kind that quietly erodes your quality of life, one shallow breath at a time. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you took a breath that felt completely effortless? No tightness, no weight, no need to clear your throat immediately after. If you had to think about it for more than a few seconds, that's already telling you something. Here's what I want you to understand right from the start. Mucus is not the problem. Mucus is a warning signal. Your body doesn't produce excess mucus for no reason. It's responding. It's reacting. Something is triggering your respiratory system to go into a kind of silent overdrive. And until we identify what that is, no cough drop, no decongestant, and no home remedy will give you lasting relief. What I'm going to share with you today has been sitting at the intersection of ancient respiratory practices and modern pulmonary research. And it all starts with something most people never suspect. Something hiding in plain sight, possibly inside the very walls of the room you're sitting in right now. Stay with me. This gets important. Let me paint you a picture. Inside your lungs and airways, right now, there is a remarkable system at work. It's called a mucociliary escalator, a biological cleaning mechanism made up of tiny hair-like structures called cilia, covered in a thin layer of mucus. Their job is to trap particles, dust, pollen, bacteria, microscopic debris, and sweep them up and out like a conveyor belt that never stops running. When this system works properly, you never notice it. It runs silently in the background, keeping your airways clean and your breathing effortless. But here's what most people don't know. This system can be disrupted, and when it is, the mucus doesn't move the way it should. It thickens. It settles. It accumulates in places it shouldn't. In the lower airways and the bronchial passages, coating the surfaces of tissue they're designed to breathe freely. And it does this quietly, not with alarm bells, not with sudden dramatic symptoms, just a gradual, creeping heaviness that you start to accept as normal. A cough that you've had so long you've forgotten to question it. A chest that never fully opens up, no matter how deeply you try to breathe. What disrupts the system? Many things: pollution, cigarette smoke, dry air, recurring infections. But there's one trigger that gets almost no attention, and I believe it's affecting far more people than anyone is willing to admit. And it lives in invisible spaces of our homes and workplaces, growing silently behind the surfaces we walk past every single day. I'm talking about mold, not the dramatic kind that blackens an entire wall and sends you to an emergency room. I'm talking about the low-level hidden kind, the kind that grows behind wallpaper, under floorboards, inside HVAC systems, around window seals, releasing microscopic spores into the air you breathe every single day without you ever knowing it's there. These spores are small enough to reach deep into the respiratory tract. And when the immune system encounters them over and over, it does what it was designed to do. It responds. It triggers inflammation. It ramps up mucus production. It tries desperately to flush out the threat. But when the exposure is constant and invisible, the response never turns off. The inflammation becomes chronic. The mucus becomes a permanent fixture. And the lungs, your lungs, begin to function in a state of permanent low-grade alert. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever felt like your chest is heavier indoors and outdoors? Have you noticed that your cough gets worse in certain rooms? Or in the morning when you wake up, have you tried multiple treatments that gave temporary relief but never actually fixed anything? These are not coincidences. These are patterns. And they're pointing somewhere very specific. I want to pause here for a moment, because what I've just described, the heavy chest, the persistent cough, the mucus that never fully clears, this isn't just discomfort. It's not something you're imagining. And it's not just your body being sensitive. It may be a sign that your body's natural respiratory cleaning system is under stress. And unlike a broken bone or a fever, this kind of stress doesn't announce itself loudly. It just slowly, quietly changes the way you breathe, until one day you realize you can't remember the last time breathing felt easy. This could be happening to you right now, as you watch this, not as a worst-case scenario, as a present reality that is well within reach of being supported and addressed. That's why I want to mention something now, before we go further. Over the past year, I've been studying a natural respiratory support method, rooted in practices used by high-altitude monks who needed to maintain lung health in cold, thin air that has been helping people support the body's own cleaning process, not as a cure, not as a substitute for medical care, but as a way to give the body the right internal environment to do what it already knows how to do. The people who've been using it describe a gradual sense of the chest becoming lighter, breathing becoming more complete, that tight, loaded feeling slowly releasing. I'll explain the full mechanism in just a moment. But if you're already feeling what I've described, I want you to check the link in the description and first comment below. There's more information there about how this natural method works and how people have been using it. You can look while I continue. Now, let's talk about what's actually happening inside the airways when this process starts to reverse, because this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Ancient Tibetan and Himalayan monks, men who lived their entire lives above 3,500 meters in altitude, where air is thin and cold and lung efficiency is everything, developed a series of breathing and dietary practices that modern researchers have only recently begun to study seriously. These weren't spiritual rituals in the way we typically think of them. They were survival tools, techniques passed down over centuries specifically to maintain the integrity of the respiratory system under extreme conditions. What's remarkable is that many of these practices align almost perfectly with what modern pulmonary science now understands about airway health, because those monks faced the same core challenge we face today, just in a different context. How do you keep airways open, clear, and functioning optimally when the environment is working against you? The answer, it turns out, has 3 layers. The first layer is moisture regulation. Mucus, when it functions correctly, has a very specific consistency, thin enough to move freely, thick enough to trap particles. When airways are inflamed or when exposure to irritants is chronic, the mucus changes composition. It becomes denser, stickier, harder to move. The cilia, those tiny sweeping fibers I mentioned, get overwhelmed. They can't push it upward. It settles instead of clearing. The second layer is inflammation management. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a hidden engine behind most persistent respiratory symptoms. It's not the dramatic, visible inflammation of an acute infection. It's quieter, a constant background signal that keeps the airways slightly constricted, slightly reactive, slightly on edge. Over time, this background inflammation changes the structure of the airway tissue itself, making it less elastic, less resilient, more prone to retaining mucus. The third layer, and this is the one that surprised me most when I first encountered in the research, is the gut-lung axis. There's a direct biochemical communication pathway between the gut microbiome and the respiratory mucosa. What lives in your digestive system actively influences the immune environment of your lungs. When the gut microbiome is disrupted by poor diet, by antibiotics, by chronic stress, the immune signaling in the lungs becomes dysregulated. The inflammatory response becomes less precise, more reactive to harmless triggers, more persistent even when the trigger is gone. Those monks, centuries before the term microbiome existed, were unknowingly addressing all 3 of these layers simultaneously through specific herbs, fermented preparations, humidification practices, and controlled breathing patterns that change the pressure dynamics in the lungs and help mobilize stagnant secretions. And here's the key insight that ties all of this together. You don't need to fix the mucus. You need to restore the conditions that allow the body to handle the mucus on its own. You need to reduce the inflammatory load. You need to support the cilia. You need to address the root trigger, whether that's hidden mold, chronic irritant exposure, or a gut-lung axis that's been knocked out of balance. When those things are addressed, the mucus normalizes, the airways open, the breathing becomes what it was always supposed to be. Now I want to tell you about 3 specific compounds that appear consistently in both traditional Himalayan respiratory practice and in modern mucosal research, because the convergence between the 2 is, scientifically speaking, extraordinary. Each of these compounds targets one of the 3 layers we just discussed, and together, they create the internal environment that allows the mucociliary system to restart. The first is a resinous plant extract used for centuries across high-altitude cultures. known to reduce airway reactivity and thin bronchial secretions without suppressing the immune system. Modern studies have looked at its active compounds and found meaningful interactions with the enzymes responsible for mucus viscosity. The second is a specific class of polyphenol derived from certain medicinal fungi, the same fungi that appear in traditional Tibetan apothecary records, that have shown the ability to modulate the inflammatory cytokine response in the bronchial mucosa. In other words, they help quiet the overactive immune signal that keeps the airways perpetually inflamed. The third is a probiotic strain, now well documented in gut-lung axis research, that has demonstrated the ability to reduce the frequency of respiratory immune overreaction in people with chronic mucus buildup, addressing the gut to restore the lungs. Ancient wisdom, confirmed by contemporary science. When these elements are combined and supported by the right breathing mechanics, what emerges is a system, a coherent, biologically supported approach that doesn't fight the mucus. It teaches the body to resolve it. I want to be direct with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty more than reassurance. The respiratory system is remarkably resilient, but it is not infinitely patient. When the mucociliary system is chronically impaired, when the airways are in a persistent state of low-grade inflammation, the tissue itself begins to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but consistently, quietly, over months and years. The cilia can thin, the airway walls can thicken, the elasticity that allows the lungs to expand fully, to draw a complete, satisfying breath, can begin to diminish. None of this is irreversible in the early and middle stages. But the window for supporting the body's natural recovery is not open indefinitely, and the longer the inflammatory environment persists, the more that window narrows. I've worked with people who waited years before addressing their symptoms, years in which they normalized a heavy chest, the shallow breathing, the perpetual feeling of not quite getting enough air. And I've worked with people who responded to the early warning signs, who made changes when the body still had the full capacity to respond. The difference in outcomes is not subtle. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you this because these are the things I wish more people knew before they were sitting across from me in a clinical setting asking why no one told them sooner. You're watching this now. That means you still have time to act while the body still responds easily, while the system is impaired but not yet fundamentally altered. There's also something else I want to address, the invisible environmental factor that we touched on at the beginning. If your symptoms are persistent across seasons, if they don't respond the way typical allergies do, if they're worse in certain environments and better in others, it is worth seriously investigating the spaces where you spend the most time. Mold assessment is available. Air quality testing is available. And while these might feel like extreme steps, I've seen people experience more respiratory improvement by addressing their living environment than by any supplement or medication they were previously prescribed. The internal and the external have to be addressed together. The body can be supported. The airways can be nourished. The inflammatory signals can be calmed. But if the trigger is still present in the environment, still being breathed in night after night, the internal work will always be fighting upstream. If you watch this far, something in what I've shared has resonated with you. Maybe it confirmed something you already suspected. Maybe it gave a name to something you've been feeling for a long time. Either way, I want you to take that seriously, because your body has been trying to communicate with you, and you've been listening. The people who act on these signals early, who don't dismiss the cough, the heaviness, the sense that something is quietly off, are the ones who get their breathing back. The ones who wait, who tell themselves it's nothing, who accept a diminished baseline as their new normal, often don't realize what they've lost until it's significantly harder to recover. I mentioned earlier the natural method that has been helping people support their respiratory system, rooted in the same three-layer approach we discussed: reducing airway inflammation, supporting the mucociliary mechanism, and restoring the gut-lung communication pathway that the immune system depends on. Many who have used it consistently describe a gradual but unmistakable change: a chest that opens more fully, a cough that slowly quiets, a quality to each breath that they hadn't felt in years. This isn't a cure. No natural method is. But it is a way to give the body what it needs to do its own work more effectively. And right now, while your system still has the plasticity to respond, is the best time to begin. The link is in the description and in the first comment below. It will take you to more information about this approach, how it works, and how others have been using it. Read it carefully, take your time with it, and if it resonates with what you're feeling in your own body, I encourage you to act now. Not because there's a countdown, but because the window in which the body responds most readily does not stay open forever. Every breath you take between now and then is either part of the problem or part of the solution. Your lungs have been quietly asking for help. Today is a good day to answer. I'm Dr. Vincent Halberg. Thank you for watching.